Hi, before we find out what happens next, make sure to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. It takes a second and really help us grow. Out of the story.
I noticed Walter Dean on one of those early spring mornings where the air still carried a bite, but the sun hinted at warmer days ahead. I was watering the scraggly flowers by my porch, half listening to the birds, when I saw him through the gap in the hedges. He sat on his porch next door, shoulders hunched, eyes on some faraway point I couldn't see. It struck me because the last time I'd seen him, months ago when I moved in, he'd waved, a broad smile lighting his face as he welcomed me to the neighborhood. Now, that light was gone. "Morning, Mr. Dean," I called gently, stepping a little closer so he could hear me. He looked over, startled, as if he'd forgotten anyone else lived on the street. His smile came slow and small, not reaching his eyes. "Morning, Lisa. Nice day. Are you doing all right?" I asked, keeping my tone light, though something in my chest ached at how frail he looked. "Oh, sure. Just tired these days." He glanced toward the door behind him as if expecting someone, or maybe hoping not to be overheard. Before I could say more, the screen door creaked open, and a woman stepped out. Cassie, I guessed. Walter's niece. Her eyes were sharp, her smile polite but tight. "Uncle Walter needs to rest," she said smoothly. "He's had a long morning." Walter shrank back a little, and I felt something in my gut twist. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Take care, Mr. Dean." As I returned to my porch, I watched out of the corner of my eye as Cassie ushered him inside, her hand firm on his arm. The door shut, and the house seemed to sigh under its own weight. That was the moment I knew something was wrong next door. I just didn't know what. Not yet. In the days that followed, I kept noticing little things that didn't sit right. I'd see Walter outside for a few minutes at a time, always when Cassie was distracted or busy. He'd shuffle down to the end of the driveway, take a deep breath of the morning air, and glance around like he was trying to remember what freedom felt like. Then, before long, Cassie's voice would call out from somewhere inside the house, sharp and clipped. And just like that, Walter would retreat, his shoulders drooping as he disappeared behind the door. One afternoon, I caught him at the mailbox. I crossed the yard, waving. "Mr. Dean, it's nice to see you out." He smiled faintly, his hands trembling as he sorted through the envelopes. "Hello, Lisa. Lovely day, isn't it?" "It is. Do you need help with those?" I asked, nodding toward the stack in his hands. "Oh, no. Cassie takes care of the important ones." His voice lowered at her name, and his eyes flicked toward the house. "She's good with all that." Before I could reply, the front door opened. Cassie appeared on the porch, her expression tight. "Uncle Walter, I told you I'd get the mail. Come inside before you catch cold." Walter hesitated, but only for a moment. "Of course, Cassie." As he turned to go, Cassie shot me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks for checking in, Lisa. But I've got him covered." Her words were polite, but there was a chill beneath them, a warning I couldn't ignore. I watched them disappear inside, my concern deepening with every passing day. It was a week later when Walter finally let something slip, though I could tell he didn't mean to. I spotted him in the side yard one afternoon, kneeling carefully by a flower bed that looked like it hadn't been tended in months. The man who had once taken pride in neat rows of marigolds and tomatoes was now pulling at weeds with shaking hands. "Hi, Mr. Dean," I called softly, crossing over. "Mind some company?" His head lifted, and for a brief second, there was that spark, the Walter I'd first met. "Always, Lisa, always." I knelt beside him, pulling at the stubborn weeds. We worked in silence for a bit before I ventured, "It's good to see you out here." He sighed, brushing dirt from his palms. "Cassie doesn't like me fussing in the garden, says it tires me out." "She just worries about you, I'm sure," I said, trying to keep the peace. Walter hesitated, then glanced toward the house. "She worries plenty, about everything except what I want." I kept my tone light. "What is it you want, Mr. Dean?" He gave a sad little laugh. "Oh, just a bit of my own mind back. And maybe my checkbook." His voice dropped to a whisper. "She says it's easier if she handles it. I don't even see the statements anymore. My heart sank. Have you talked to anyone about that? He shook his head, suddenly wary. No. Best not to make a fuss. Cassie says I'm forgetful these days. Probably for the best. Before I could say more, the back door creaked. Cassie's voice called out, sharp and cheerful all at once. Uncle Walter, time for your tea. Walter straightened slowly, his hands trembling. Thanks for the help, Lisa. Don't let me keep you. I watched him go, the smile fading from his face the moment he turned. And I knew then. I couldn't stay on the sidelines anymore. After that day in the garden, I couldn't shake the unease that settled deep in my chest. I began noticing more, not because I was looking for trouble, but because it was impossible to miss once my eyes were open to it. Walter was outside less and less. When I did see him, he seemed smaller somehow, as if he were folding in on himself. His smiles came slower, and they never lasted long. Cassie, on the other hand, always seemed to be watching. I'd glance toward their house and catch her at the window, or standing on the porch with her arms crossed like she was daring me to come any closer. One morning, I spotted Mrs. Adler, another neighbor, sharp as a tack despite her 80-plus years, tending her roses at the corner. I crossed over, drawn to the familiar comfort of her company. Morning, Mrs. Adler, I said. She straightened slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. Morning, Lisa. You look like you've got something on your mind. I hesitated. It's Mr. Dean. I can't help but worry. He doesn't seem himself. Her mouth tightened. You're not imagining it. Used to see him every day on his walks. Now, weeks go by and he's nowhere to be found. That niece of his keeps him on a short leash. Have you ever tried to check in? She gave a sad shake of her head. Cassie makes it clear she doesn't welcome visitors, claims Walter tires easily. But it wasn't like that before she came. That night, I started keeping notes. Small things, the dates and times I saw Walter, the things he said in passing, the way Cassie spoke for him, over him, around him. It felt like the only way I could make sense of what was happening, to gather proof for myself that I wasn't overreacting. I also started finding excuses to stop by. I'd bake extra muffins and drop them off, or ask if they needed anything from the store. Cassie always answered the door, her smile polite, her words clipped. Thanks, but we're fine. Walter would sometimes appear behind her, his expression hopeful, then resigned as the door closed between us. One afternoon, I caught him alone at the fence. We talked about the weather, his old garden, the books he used to love. His voice grew wistful. Haven't been to the library in ages. Cassie says it's too much trouble. Would you like to go? I asked gently. He hesitated. It'd be nice, but she wouldn't like it. She worries. Maybe she'd understand if you had company, I offered. Walter smiled then, small but real. You're kind, Lisa, but best not to rock the boat. Hi, enjoying the story? Drop a like or comment. Your support means a lot and helps keep these stories coming. Now back to the story. As I watched him shuffle back toward the house, I knew I couldn't let it rest. Not anymore. It wasn't long after that quiet conversation by the fence that Cassie made her move. I'd just come back from the market, arms full of groceries, when I spotted her standing on my front step. She wore that same tight smile, but this time her eyes held no pretense of warmth. Lisa, she said, voice sugar-sweet, do you have a minute? I set the bags down carefully. Of course. Is everything all right? Cassie folded her arms, leaning against the post. Look, I appreciate that you're friendly, really, but I think it would be better for everyone if you kept some distance from Uncle Walter. My heart thudded in my chest, but I kept my voice even. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I was only trying to be a good neighbor. Of course, she said quickly, though the edge in her tone didn't soften. It's just, he's fragile, easily confused these days. I'm sure you understand. I'm doing what's best for him. I nodded slowly, holding her gaze. I see. Cassie straightened. Good. I knew you'd understand. She didn't wait for me to say more, just turned and strode back toward Walter's house, the tension between us thick enough to cut. Inside, I set down my keys and took a deep breath. Her message had been clear: stay away, but it only strengthened my resolve. After Cassie's visit, the weight of everything settled heavier on my chest. Her warning replayed in my mind, but so did the look in Walter's eyes that day in the garden. I knew I couldn't walk away, not when something was so clearly wrong. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at my laptop screen. I typed "Elder Financial Abuse Help" into the search bar, hands trembling just slightly. Among the links and hotlines, one name kept popping up: a local senior advocacy center. Without letting myself second guess, I dialed the number. "Senior Outreach, this is Jonas speaking. How can I help you today?" His voice was warm, steady, the kind that made it easier to breathe. "Hi, My throat tightened. "I don't know if I'm calling the right place. It's about my neighbor." "Take your time," Jonas said gently. "Tell me what's going on." And so I did. I told him about Walter, about Cassie's control, about the way his light seemed to be fading day by day. I kept my voice low, as if Cassie might somehow hear me through the walls. Jonas listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You did the right thing calling us. It sounds like Walter might need support, and we can help with that. Would you be willing to meet and talk more? We can go over what's happening in detail." "Yes," I said, the words spilling out in a rush. "Please." We met that afternoon at the community center. Jonas was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and a notepad he barely glanced at, focused instead on listening. The conversation was filled with quiet questions, things I hadn't thought to notice, but now seemed so obvious. Did Walter have visitors? Did he ever seem confused or just sad? Did Cassie control his medications, his appointments? When I left, Jonas promised to look into options. "You're doing a good thing, Lisa. Sometimes it takes just one person paying attention to make a difference." That night, I sat in my living room, watching the light in Walter's window flicker out, and felt for the first time like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this fight. The next few weeks unfolded in quiet determination. Jonas stayed in touch, and together we planned small, careful steps, nothing that would startle Walter or alert Cassie before we were ready. Every conversation we had built my resolve. Jonas taught me what to observe, what questions to ask gently, what moments to document. The process was slow, but deliberate. I kept a small notebook tucked in my bag, where I recorded the details I noticed. When Cassie left the house, how long Walter spent outside, the names of visitors, though there were rarely any. I found reasons to check in on Walter more often. I'd bring over soup on chilly afternoons or a newspaper I thought he might enjoy. I baked bread one weekend and wrapped up a warm loaf for him. He always looked surprised, but grateful. When Cassie wasn't home, he seemed lighter somehow, like a man surfacing for air. He'd invite me to sit on the porch, and we'd talk about books, the garden he missed, the days when the neighborhood felt like a community. One afternoon, while we sat side by side in the fading sun, I dared to ask, "Walter, do you still handle your own bills and banking?" He hesitated, his fingers twitching at the hem of his sweater. "Cassie says it's too much for me. She handles it now. Less for me to worry about. Do you see your statements? Or your checkbook?" He shook his head slowly. "Cassie keeps it safe. That's what she says." He stared down at his hands. "I used to take care of all that. I liked knowing where I stood. Now, I don't know much of anything." "Do you want to?" I asked softly. He looked at me then, truly looked, as if weighing whether he could trust me with the truth. "Yes, I do." Jonas helped arrange for a lawyer from the advocacy center to review what little Walter could share. Old paperwork he still had tucked in drawers, notes he'd made in the margins of calendars, small things that, together, painted a larger picture. There were gaps, payments Walter didn't remember approving, subscriptions and services he'd never used. Bit by bit, we pieced together the truth. Cassie wasn't just helping. She was draining him, controlling him, isolating him under the guise of care. The hardest part was pretending, when I saw Cassie, that nothing had changed. She would wave from the porch, her smile tight, and I'd force one in return. But inside, I was gathering the strength and the evidence to help Walter take back what was his. The first real confrontation came quietly, as I knew it would. Cassie's mask of politeness was slipping, and I could feel the tension every time our paths crossed. It was subtle at first, longer looks, clipped greetings, the door closing a little faster when I knocked. But the day she tried to cut me off from Walter entirely, I knew we'd reached a turning point. It was a mild afternoon when I stopped by with a book I thought Walter would enjoy, an old mystery he'd once mentioned fondly. Cassie answered the door before I could even knock, as if she'd been watching for me. Her smile was tight, her posture rigid. "Lisa," she said, her voice sweet but strained, "you really shouldn't keep dropping by unannounced. Uncle Walter needs his rest." "I won't stay long," I said, holding up the book. "I just wanted to give him this. We talked about it the other day." Cassie's eyes hardened. "He doesn't need more distractions. I'm doing what's best for him." "I think it's time you respected that." I kept my tone even, but firm. "I am respecting him, Cassie. That's why I'm here." Her smile vanished entirely. "You don't know what you're meddling in." "I know enough," I said quietly. "And I'm not going away." For a long moment we stood there, the weight of unspoken truths between us. Then she stepped back, closing the door without another word. I stood on the porch, heart pounding, knowing the line had been drawn. That evening, I called Jonas. We agreed. It was time to act. The quiet investigation was over. Now we'd protect Walter, no matter what it took. The next few days moved faster than I expected. Jonas connected me with an attorney from the Advocacy Center, a woman named Clara, who specialized in elder protection. Clara was calm, methodical, and kind. Exactly the sort of steady presence I needed. Together, we reviewed the notes, the gaps in Walter's records, and the quiet distress he'd shared in moments of trust. It was enough to take action. Clara arranged a meeting with Walter at the community center. I drove him there, Cassie none the wiser. He was nervous at first, his hands trembling as we walked inside. But as Clara spoke, gently, clearly, laying out his rights and options, I saw something in Walter shift, a spark of the man he used to be. He straightened in his chair, nodded along, asked questions. When Clara spoke of safeguards and regaining control over his affairs, he listened intently. "I didn't think I had a choice," he admitted, voice low. "Cassie said I'd just get confused, that this was best." "You do have a choice, Walter," Clara said gently, "and we can help you take it back." The legal process began that day. Clara filed paperwork to freeze certain accounts, to block unauthorized access, to set up protections. Jonas helped coordinate with social services, ensuring Walter's medical needs and well-being were also part of the plan. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just steady, deliberate steps towards safety. Cassie noticed the change. I saw it in the way she watched me now, suspicion sharp in her gaze. But she didn't confront me again. Maybe she sensed the tide had turned, or maybe she was too busy trying to figure out how to hold on to what was slipping from her grasp. It didn't take long for the cracks in Cassie's facade to widen. As the legal protections tightened, so did her grip, or rather, her attempt to maintain it. She stopped pretending with me altogether. The polite smiles were gone, replaced by cool stares and tight-lipped silence when we crossed paths. I learned from Jonas that Cassie tried to access Walter's accounts after the freeze, only to be denied. The bank flagged the attempt, and that only added to the growing file of concerns. Walter's lawyer kept things professional, but firm. The more Cassie tried to maneuver, the clearer it became to those watching what she was really after. Neighbors started noticing, too. Mrs. Adler mentioned one afternoon, "Funny how we never see Cassie with him anymore. She used to parade him around like a badge." Now she stayed inside, her calls to Walter sharper, her voice carrying through open windows on warm days. Walter, though still fragile, seemed lighter each time I saw him. He began to sit on his porch again, to wave at passers-by. When I joined him, he spoke more easily, his mind clearer without the constant pressure Cassie had applied. "Feels like I can breathe again," he told me once. "Thanks to you." Cassie didn't go quietly, of course. There were meetings she stormed out of, letters she sent full of bluster. But it didn't matter. The truth was out, and the safeguards were in place. She'd lost the control she'd tried so hard to keep, and Walter, at last, was free from her shadow. In the weeks that followed, the air on our street seemed lighter. Cassie moved out quietly, her departure as abrupt as her arrival had been. There was no dramatic farewell, no parting words, just a moving truck early one morning and the sight of her car disappearing down the road. The neighbors noticed, of course, but no one asked too many questions. We all understood enough. Walter settled into his new normal slowly, with gentle steps. I visited often, but now as a friend, not out of worry. We shared tea on the porch, and he told me stories from his younger days, his travels, his late wife's sharp wit, the garden he'd once tended with pride. "Lisa, did I ever tell you about the time I got lost in Paris?" Walter chuckled, eyes twinkling. "No, but now I have to hear it," I laughed, leaning forward. "I ended up in the wrong hotel room. Thought it was mine until I saw a very confused Frenchman staring back at me." We both laughed, the sound easy and light. His voice grew steadier, his laughter more frequent. One afternoon, as we planted flowers together, Walter wiped his brow. "These old hands still remember what to do." "They look pretty capable to me," I said, handing him a trowel. "You're a good friend, Lisa." He patted my arm. "I don't know what I would have done without you. You'd have figured it out. You're stronger than you think." Jonas stopped by one morning, bringing pastries, checking in on my favorite duo. He grinned. "Jonas, you shouldn't have," Walter said, delighted. "I couldn't resist. How are you both?" "Better every day," Walter replied, "and you're always welcome here." Clara called later that week. "Lisa, I just wanted to let you know everything's settled. Walter's future is secure." "Thank you, Clara. That means so much. There's nothing left to fight, only life to enjoy now." And so we did. We hosted a tea for the neighbors. Mrs. Adler clinked her cup against Walter's. "You're looking well, Walter." "Thanks to good friends," he said, smiling at me. The house next door that had felt so heavy with tension now seemed filled with light again. Every time Walter smiled, I felt that same light in myself, knowing that sometimes the quietest victories are the most powerful of all. The summer that followed felt like a gift. The street bloomed with color, and so did Walter. Every morning, I'd see him on his porch, watering the flowers we'd planted together or reading the paper, his smile easy and frequent. "Morning, Lisa," he'd call as I stepped outside. "Come have a cup of tea. The day's too beautiful not to share." And I would. We'd sit together, talking about nothing and everything. Walter's laugh, once rare, became a familiar sound. Jonas visited often, always bringing something small, a plant for the porch, a fresh loaf of bread. "You two make this street feel like home," he said one day, settling into a chair beside us. "That's because it is home," Walter replied, his voice warm. "And I owe that to both of you." "You owe us nothing," I said softly. "You're the heart of this place, Walter. We just helped you see it again." The neighborhood seemed to come alive with small joys. Mrs. Adler organized a block picnic. Children chalked colorful drawings on the sidewalks. And Walter became part of it all, waving to everyone, telling stories, sharing the harvest from his small garden. One afternoon, as we watched the sunset paint the sky in gold and pink, Walter turned to me. "Lisa, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But I didn't. I had people who cared. That's worth more than anything Cassie tried to take." "I'm glad you see that now," I said, squeezing his hand. As twilight settled, I felt at peace. The fight was over. What remained was simple and true: kindness, community, and the quiet victory of a life reclaimed.